Good evening, HGSE, and good evening, Women in Leadership Institute participants, graduate students here at the, louder than this? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, I think that he turned it up, so I'll say it again. Good evening to HGSE, good evening, Women in Leadership Institute participants, doctoral students, faculty, and friends from New York and elsewhere. We are delighted to be gathering here this evening for a wonderful opportunity to engage in conversation with the Chancellor of the New York City Public Schools. Let me just tell you a little bit about Chancellor Carmen Fariña. She is the Chancellor of the New York City Department of Education. She is the woman for the job. It is the largest school district in the United States, serving 1.1 million students in over 1,800 schools. No easy task. She has been at this work as an educator for 5 decades. This is her mission. This is her passion. She has distinguished herself as an innovative teacher, as an award-winning and recognized principal, as superintendent and deputy chancellor, committed to helping students, teachers, and principals excel. As chancellor, Carmen Fariña is working collaboratively with everyone: parents, educators, members of school communities, and external stakeholders to ensure that every child graduates from New York City public schools and from our high schools prepared for college, a career, and a future as a productive, critically thinking adult. She is a co-author of a book entitled A School Leader's Guide to Excellence, Collaborating Our Way to Better Schools, and someone in the reception that we just had shared with her that she's a member of the Institute, she had read the book, and Carmen's smile was out to here. She holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from New York University, and as a fellow alum of that school with a BS as well, I know that she was well prepared. She has master's degrees from Brooklyn College, Fordham University, and Pace University. Just as importantly, she is a mother, a wife, a grandmother, and a woman who is committed in all ways to ensuring that every child receives what they are entitled to. Please join me in giving a Harvard welcome to Chancellor Carmen Fariña. So I'm going to turn it over to the Chancellor to just share at the onset some of her thoughts about her career over those 5 decades, what inspired her to make education her life's work, and other things that she wants us to know about how you get this work done.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I was inspired to meet so many of you before, and I've actually just almost changed my entire presentation just based on the questions that you asked. I started school in New York City as a non-English speaking student, and that colors a lot of my feelings going forward about how students should be treated, because I wasn't treated particularly nicely, because my teacher in those days felt that somehow or other, if we didn't speak English and our parents didn't push it home, we were somehow second-class citizens. And I'm here to say that anything you experience as a young child, somehow or other you take with you for the rest of your lives. I also came from a family who had to leave Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and my father really believed in political conversations at the dinner table and taught me the views of the Spanish Civil War from his perspective, which were not exactly what my teachers wanted to hear in my 4th grade classroom, my sophomore year of high school. So history became my passion, and to this day, teaching social studies from multiple perspectives is something I believe in totally. There isn't any topic in social studies that I can't give you 2 points of view. But more importantly, it also convinced me that students' voices need to be heard in the classroom, even if, as a sophomore in high school, I was suspended for 1 day because I had the nerve to tell my teacher that I didn't think Spain should be part of NATO. And Well, at the time, there was a dictatorship there. She saw it as a liberator. I saw it as a dictator. Semantics do matter. She called my dad, and my dad came to school and basically said, I believe in what my daughter said. However, if you make me take her home, because she wanted my dad to make me apologize to the teacher. So my dad said, I will take her to the library, and she'll write a paper on why she's right. And to this day, I still remember, I went to the library, I got a book called The Yoke and the Arrows by Herb Matthews, and I wrote my paper, and the teacher, better than argue with me, kind of let me have my way and just always called me a rebel. And that's when I knew my calling was to be a teacher. I don't think I ever wanted to be anything else. I had a wonderful teacher. I didn't expect to go to college. My family did not have the money. But a teacher said to me, what is it you want to do? I said, I want to be a teacher. She said, well, you have to take different courses, because they had put me in the non-academic track for many reasons that many of our kids today are put on non-academic tracks. She made sure I doubled up on all my courses. I took Regents without taking the classes. And I was able to get a 4-year scholarship to NYU, which in those days was no easy feat. But it really committed me more than ever to becoming a teacher who can make a difference and who understood very clearly that relationships matter. I think as a teacher, I loved every single year of it. It's not that there weren't easier years and hard years, but I was a classroom teacher for 22 years. And people often stopped me and said, oh, you're still only a teacher? And the reality is I didn't see it that way. I wasn't on a fast track to be something else, because to me, teaching...
I'm sorry.
Okay. I have a lunch with voice.
Just keep going. Good.
Thanks.
Thank
To me, teaching was a calling. And because I also worked and taught in the community I lived in, it was not unheard of for me to have my parent-teacher conferences in my home. Every child had a birthday party with cake at my house. We had our end-of-year parties in my backyard. My husband still doesn't forgive me because he laid down sod, and that was the day I was having the party, and of course, he had to lay it down again. The reality is I also taught my own daughters, not something I would recommend anyone sane do, but in the school that I taught in was relatively small, and my daughters were going to be in my class. I offered to change grades, but the principal said if I did, there'd be a mutiny because the parents kind of expected me. But I think also I waited to become a teacher until my children were in middle school. When I left teaching, I became a staff developer. And the reason I'm giving you all this is that I think it's so important today to take your time and savor the moment in whatever job you have. Every job I had developed credibility for the next job. When I became a staff developer, teachers didn't look at me and say, what does she think she's doing, you know? I went into classrooms, I did demo lessons, special ed classrooms, ELL classrooms, gifted classrooms, all over Brooklyn in the area that I worked in. I went into middle schools, I went into high schools, and I was always comfortable. And to this day, I will go into a classroom and teach a lesson on the drop of a hat. Not a math lesson, but you give me ELA and social studies, I'll do it. And I think that credibility made it possible when I went to become a principal. They had had 5 principals in 7 years. It was a school in a very exclusive area, Upper East Side of Manhattan. And people basically said, why you for this school at this time? Because I had several strikes against me. Number one, I was from Brooklyn, as you can tell from my accent. People weren't sure that on the Upper East Side that I would be well received. I was also coming, again, from the outer places, and I hadn't necessarily been part of that community. But I went into that school, and I have to tell you, my 10 years as a principal were absolutely phenomenal. I joke with my staff that my life at PS6 is 2 degrees of separation for everyone I meet. And to this day, the networking I did as a principal, which I did unconsciously, has helped me even in this job. Everywhere we go, there's a PS6 parent, a PS6 student, someone who says, how can I help you? And because those parents were very appreciative, because we turned that school around within 3 years. It was always a good school, we made it a great school. And we made it a great school by really working on professional development, making sure the right teachers were on the bus and the wrong teachers were off the bus, and that was not an easy task. I got a call one day from the chancellor that asked me if I was ready. He didn't kind of put it that way. He didn't say, are you ready? He says, I need you to leave your school tomorrow and become a superintendent. And within one night, I left a school to become a superintendent in a district that had just had a superintendent removed, and when there was a tremendous amount of bad feelings. And the reason I'm telling you that story is that I think it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't built all these other collaborative ventures along the way, and also able to go into a situation that was fraught with people being angry, disgusted. I mean, I went to my first principals meeting, half the principals turned their back on me. This is in my own neighborhood, because they hadn't liked what had happened prior to my getting there. And it took a while to build trust, but I think that credibility came from all the years that I had done all the other jobs. I want to say at this point, because so many of you said to me to talk about a balanced life, none of this could have happened without having a supportive family. And whether you're a woman who has a husband or a significant other, or a man who has a wife, being in this job requires being in this job together. And I can't say enough. As a teacher, my husband went on all my overnight trips. He had to stay with the boys, I stayed with the girls, because I didn't want parents, because parents tend to get too involved with their own kids. So his job is to keep an eye on the boys. To this day, those kids, because I still live in the same neighborhood, still stop and ring our doorbells and ask, and how's Tony? When I became a principal, he was totally involved in my school life. He offered to work on the PTA board, because he's a certified accountant, to help them with their books. Anything they needed done, he makes the best sangria in the world. Did it at all our fundraisers. When I had a retirement party, probably the only principal in New York City, the retirement party was both myself and my husband. And I think that to have a balanced life, you have to welcome the other person into that life. We can't say, this is your job, this is my job, but how do we do this job together? And I know I was recently at a school where the principal, I had visited the classrooms, I'd seen what was going on there. And by the time I got to her office, we were talking about education, and then all of a sudden she says, do you mind? And then started tears, and said, you know what, I just want to let you know this job is so important to me. She says, I actually think I'm divorcing my husband. And I said, you've got to be kidding. If this job is so hard, that's exactly what you don't need to do. And we went off track totally. Instead of talking about the job, talking about personal life. And the reality is I do think that balance in life is all. And I think it's also important. Both my daughters are somewhat involved, not this job so much, but in all my other jobs. After becoming a superintendent, I then got a call. Once again, it's the story of my life. I don't apply for jobs. Somehow or other, I get them. And it's a nice thing to do, because you don't have to wait 6 months to find out if you have it or not. But I got a call, and I thought I was going to a regular meeting. Actually, I thought I'd gotten in trouble, because I have a tendency to do things that are a little off the beaten path. And they said, well, by this afternoon, actually, he said, I have 15 minutes. We have a press conference. I'm announcing you the new deputy chancellor. And this is I had just left my office, and not to be able to go back and then take on the other job. And I think that job, again, because a lot of the people had known me in the city, it was easier to take on that job and do the work that needed to be done, because you already had credibility. And you don't get credibility because you have a certain diploma or you have a certain name. You get credibility because you've done the job. You've walked in other people's shoes. You can say, and sometimes I do exaggerate a little bit when I want to make a point with certain people, when I was this or I was that. But the reality is, I have done those jobs. I've done them to the best of my ability. I took some time off and spent a lot of time traveling with my husband. Also, a tremendous amount of babysitting. One of my finest moments, my grandson, my 8-year-old grandson, had to write an essay this week on the most important woman in his life. My daughter was hoping was going to be her. He told her he's not allowed to write about his mother. Turns out not to be true.
He's a politician.
Ben is definitely a manipulator. And what he said is I love having time with my abuela and having very deep conversations, because we have very deep conversations. But I can't wait till she retires again, because then we'll have more time together. And I think the message is, how do you value your time? Who do you put first, second, and third? Prioritizing your job, I think, is important, but there comes a time prioritizing family is equally important. I think in the job I have now, I always get a little scared when people say 1.1 million. I don't see the job like that. I really see the job as kind of breaking it up into pieces and getting the best people that you know surrounding you. And being able to delegate. When I was a principal, let me go back and say, when I was a teacher, every June, my goal for success was that the kids could run the classroom, and if I wasn't there, nobody would know I was missing. And by the way, it worked almost every year. The one year it didn't work, I faulted myself, not the kids. When I became a principal, every teacher in my building was an expert in something. I had an expert on social, emotional growth of other teachers. Her job was to hold people's hands who were having meltdowns. I had someone who did my scheduling. I had someone who planned the parties. I had someone who was my literacy, my math. Everyone in that building, if I was gone for a week or two, no one should know that I wasn't in the building. I believe we work people towards independence. We surround ourselves, rather than worrying about who's looking for our jobs, we should be almost try to make ourselves extinct. And the real sign of a good leader is making other leaders feel confident and moving everyone towards independence. One of the things we were just talking about in the green room was the fact that we're on Twitter and, Blackberries and everything. And I said, what I think that has done, other than taking away all our personal life, it has also forced us to have people dependent on us. If I didn't have a Blackberry, everyone back at work, including this one emergency that became double-digit emergency that I've been dealing, someone would have had to deal with it. And you know what? And they would have dealt with it very competently. But this fact that now you have to have someone else to second your opinion worries me a lot about how do we move towards independence. So I think, what I want to end about this part is that I love what I do. People tell me I actually look younger than I did before I took the job. But I do know that there are times, my husband has been a phenomenal supporter, but we very clearly said when I took on this job that he's entitled to spend 3 months in Florida, where he is right now. And we go back and forth, and he's coming back. But it's important to know that a balanced life makes you a better leader in whatever field you do. If you do not have some support at home, it makes your job much harder to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I have some questions that I want to ask, but I'm curious about this. You were home, you were with the grandchildren, and you got another call?
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I remember thinking, she's coming out of retirement to take on this job. Can you talk about that?
I think, first of all, people may not know, the mayor and I had worked together in an educational partnership before. When I was superintendent, he actually sat on my school board. So for those of you who know school boards, it's not always the best relationship. But actually, I had a phenomenal school board. I had a school board where all the members were, almost all, were progressives, put children first, and really understood about equity. And that's certainly where I came from. So I didn't have to explain myself to the mayor. I didn't have to sell myself to the mayor. I didn't have to say this is who I am, because he knew who I was. Also, we live in the same neighborhood, basically, so there was no lack of people to tell him, what about Carmen, I'm assuming. So when he asked me originally, I really felt that, I really had settled into a life. Mm-hmm. I think the tipping point for me is more when people kept saying, we need to bring an educator back to head our school system. It really was the one thing. And one of the things that, I was asked to do is to give some advice. And the more advice I gave, the more I started thinking to myself, well, rather than give advice to other people, why don't I just do it myself? And I think it was a time in New York City where you really needed to know what already had happened and where the strengths were, because a lot of the changes were good changes, and where the weaknesses were that I thought I could add something to. Certainly for me, one of the weaknesses was that we needed more professional development, which is my passion. But also, I do believe strongly that principals need support, but they also need supervision. And putting back strong superintendents, which we just did in the last few months, is a really important part of my administration. Mm-hmm. So I do think that being able to come back and do what I thought had to be done, and again, with no ego and no other ambitions, let someone else come after me with that, but I didn't have to do that, so I can stand on my principles. I can say this is important, and I can also work for a mayor who's going to have my back, and I'm going to have his back.
Mm-hmm. So that relationship is
crucial.
Crucial. Now, you came into a system, as you said, there were lots of reforms. Can you talk to us about how you spent the first 6 months trying to get the lay of the land and figure out what was working? As you said, some of the changes were good, and what needed to be tweaked and what needed to be changed?
Well, as part of my, I don't know what to call it, semi-retirement, I had served as a consultant. So as part of being a consultant, I had visited almost 200 schools within the 3 or 4 years I was doing that. So I had a pretty good handle on what had happened in the field. And principal after principal said, we're being mandated to do this, mandated to do that, but when it comes time to get support, who do we call? I also had a very good relationship, and still do to this day, with parents in New York City. I had every job I've had, I've worked collaboratively with parents, and parents said, we don't know who to call, we don't know, who's listening to us. So I knew that communication was key, and that putting support systems both for parents and for principals was crucial.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it was relatively simple to say, okay, the first thing I think even before I started the job was making sure we were going to have a professional development department, which no longer existed, back.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that we had a strong leader in that department with a strong emphasis on literacy, and I do believe in Common Core, but I don't think it was rolled out well. We didn't give teachers the right tools. We certainly didn't give them the right training. So taking 2 steps backwards to go forwards. We also instituted town hall meetings this is a little over a year. I must have done, and still continue to do, over 50 town hall meetings around the city of New York, to which we averaged 300 parents.
Mm-hmm.
And getting the message out. This is what we stand for, but also listening. I think a good leader doesn't just tell what they're thinking, but listens and then follows up. One of the things I've made it my business, if I go to a town hall meeting, the promise is within 48 hours, somebody will get back to you about whatever the big issues are. So I think it was about, I knew what I wanted, professional development, more emphasis on English language learners, special needs kids. We developed deputy chancellors for both of those units independently with their own offices. We're doing the largest, considering our size, dual language programs nationally. We are really investing our work in literacy that doesn't contradict Common Core, but also uses what we call common sense approach. We're very heavily involved in many schools with Lucy Calkins and the Reading and Writing Project.
Okay.
So there are lots of things that we did from the very beginning, but I think listening and going out and talk, even if people were not happy with us, because there were always the people who wanted a different opinion, but listening and also giving credit to what I do think was good about the other administration. I think a big emphasis on data, a big emphasis on everybody being college ready. We certainly had the initiative of making sure we had an additional 20,000 pre-K seats so that and nobody thought we could do it, 53,000 pre-K seats opening in school, and we hope to have another 20,000 for next year. So there was a lot of initiatives moving simultaneously, but the listening and going out and speaking to the public was crucial.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You're a woman leader in education and government, and we're thrilled. Would all of you who are here for the Women in Leadership Institute just raise your hand so that she has a sense of who you are? And then there are other women leaders who happen not to be in the Institute, as one of our graduate students reminded me. So we'd like to just take a few minutes to ask you to share your perspective. Gentlemen, just bear with us. What unique challenges, you can learn from this too, what unique challenges have you faced, Carmen, and what strengths can women bring to government and education leadership specifically?
Well, the challenges are things that my daughters are both in their 40s, and they never heard some of these stories because I never thought it was worth repeating because it's just what was in those days. But one of my daughters actually went to a presentation I just gave, and she says, "Mom, you never told us this." When I was a teacher, I had been an award-winning Teacher of the Year in New York City. And yet, I was told not to apply for summer jobs because the men teachers needed the money more. And though I was more qualified, and because, the principal asked you to do this, and I said, okay, the premise was that if you had a husband, the husband could provide for that. This was extra money. It was pin money. And now I think it's terrible. I also remember I never took a maternity leave for the following reasons. My daughters were born 22 months apart. I did take a little bit of time off, although I worked in the library for that time. I got a call from my principal, and he asked if he wanted to talk to me, or the superintendent. And he wanted me to give up my maternity leave, which in those days had never happened in New York City, and wanted me to come back. My daughter was like maybe 4 weeks old, and commit to starting the first gifted program in Brooklyn, in PS 29. And and when I went I said, look, I'm not sure I'm ready to raise my children, this is what I want to do. And he said, but however, there's some conditions, and he didn't say them as conditions, he said, but one of the things, because you have children, you would have to go before a panel of parents of the children of the class you're going to teach, because they have concerns. What were their concerns? Well, if your children are sick, who's going to take care of them? If you do this, what's going to happen? And the reality is, I didn't even think it was unusual. I thought, okay, they asked you to do this, you did it, and I did, I explained. And I ended up not only getting the job, but the first day I show up for the job, I can't find my time card. And I'm looking for my time card, and where's my time card? And this is the school I had taught in all my life, so I'm not new to this building. And finally, I went to the secretary, and I said, I'm looking for my time card. She said, we don't give time cards to mothers who give up maternity leaves. And she literally would not give me my time card. I had to go into the principal's office and said, look, if this is not what you want me to do, tell me now. And there was an assumption that even in teaching, because teaching was always considered a woman's job, that you couldn't be a woman and have children and work and do all this and do it well. And the reality is you do it better. Because when you have your own children, you put a different emphasis, because it could be anybody's child that you're teaching, it could be your own. And when I became a principal, I learned something from this lesson, that for every other teacher I hired, I always made sure that one of the teachers I hired was a parent herself, or himself, because they brought something else to the table that allowed them, I think, to be better teachers. So I think those are the things. And also, when I became not a deputy chancellor, a superintendent, one of the things that was part of the requirement, I was replacing a male superintendent, is that just so you know, he did things this way and this way and this, but now that you're a woman, you might want to change this. Well, I said, I may change it, but not because I'm a woman, it's because that was wrong and this is right. And I think for too long, and maybe it's because of my age, we kind of let people tell us what to do rather than going in with our own principles in place. I'm not afraid to stand up to anybody right now, including, if necessary, the governor at a legislative hearing, because I believe in certain things have to be said. But I think the advantage also of being older is that you fought all your fights. You're ready to do the work, and I think that's really, really important. But I think as women, we also allow ourselves to be pegged in ways that, and I feel just as sorry for men, I'll be honest with you. I don't think, I think for men who have to make certain life decisions, I have son-in-laws, and part of the decisions have to be how much time you're going to spend with your kids. Kids have two parents. And I think the pleasure of raising children should not be given to one parent over another. Mm-hmm.
Does everybody in the room know what a time card is?
You're right.
I just,
That's
that
cute.
happens to me
That's
all
cute.
the time. I'll say things,
Right.
and then one of my students will give me a little furrowed brow look, and I realize, you don't know what I'm talking about, do you? So everybody knows what a time card is?
You literally had to clock in.
Okay, good. So you're talking about when you started and why you wanted to become a teacher, and I know that teaching was one of the few opportunities that we had. You, as a professional woman, you were either going to be a teacher or a nurse, something in the medical field. So, in fact, at New York University, our Bachelor of Science degree was in a school that had
That's right.
education and nursing. We were housed
Correct.
in the same department. So there's been significant progress since then, and that's not the case anymore. Would you still have gone into education, Carmen? And how do we recruit young men and women to become teachers today when they have so many choices? And how do we get people here to stay in the profession when they have so many choices?
I would have been a teacher over and over and over again. I think what sometimes happens, and I blame the press a little bit for this, the pleasures of our job are not often what's in the paper. It's all the negativity. If I tell you that one of the presents that my daughter gave me when I took on this job, and she really struggled with what she was going to give me, but she said, I have it. She gave me a reunion of as many former students of mine as she could find. Now, these are all people in their 30s, 40s, and some 50, and about 135, 140 of them came. They came from all over. And one after the other talked about the difference I made in their lives. And that, I taught them to read and write. I was a 3rd and 4th grade teacher. I was a 6th grade teacher. They taught me that the difference I made in their lives was about the humanity, was about the collaboration. A lot of my former students have ended up being educators, and they could have been anything. But they said, you made teaching fun, but you also made us all feel important. Like I said, I took them on one particular class, which I had for 2 years. I took 4 of them away every weekend for an entire year until I had the whole class away. I think we make an influence in people that other jobs don't do. If you have a class of 30 kids, you've changed 30 lives. Teaching is about relationships. I was at something else the other day, at Bank Street Bookstore. They reopened, and they asked me if I would come and help them. And I love Bank Street Bookstore, so I said yes. And there's one woman in this audience who's shaking her head, yes, 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 everything. Turns out she had been a student of mine. I was an adjunct professor at Bank Street, leadership training. And she said, you were the reason I became a principal, stayed a principal, encouraged people to be. That's the kind of influence we have as educators, and I don't think we talk about the joy of the job enough. And also, sometimes we become too much in a hurry to go to the next job, and there's no such thing as not doing a good job. And I try all the time to meet with teachers. I was with teachers last night, teachers mainly of struggling schools, and saying to them, if you can go in June and say, because I was here, I influenced these many kids, how much better than that does it get? You can't do that in the stock market. You can't do that in publishing. You can't do that in other. So why not talk about the celebration? So yes, I would have been a teacher. My father said I was born a teacher. He said most of his friends' children hated coming to my house because I made them sit and learn. And someone pointed to me the other day that in their favorite picture, one of the time, says when I'm talking to the mayor, I was going like this, like a teacher. Not intentionally, but I do think teaching, when you do it right and you do it with love, can make a big difference in your life and forever.
So you spoke about Bank Street, and that has me going to a question that's out of sequence, but we have quite a few of our Women in Leadership Institute participants in higher education. Can you raise your hand so she has a sense of who you are? So we know that your focus as principal and as deputy and certainly as chancellor has been on ensuring that students are well prepared, not only for K-12 but also for college. In what ways have you worked with higher education to maximize that possibility for the children of New York City?
Well, certainly we're working with universities to see, number one, how they can change their teacher preparation programs. And for example, we started this program for many more dual language programs. Lo and behold, what are we finding? We don't have enough teachers who are trained in the second language who can teach academic language. So when we started looking, and we have a lot of universities in New York, as you do in Boston, we found that only 1 or 2 were certifying enough teachers to be the academic dual language. So meeting with universities, convincing them. We have a lot of special needs kids, and yet when we started looking, if any university was doing any research on, for example, students with dyslexia, we could only find 1 in all of New York City and talking to them. The other thing is I meet with the deans of the universities on a regular basis, and one of the things I'm really asking them to do is to rethink their teacher education programs. And I was just talking to one of you of this before. We need teachers who come into teaching better prepared to teach content areas and better prepared to teach children. Not the subject, but the children themselves. How do you form a relationship with a child, especially as we're going to a different kind of discipline code in New York City? Students will not misbehave in classes if they're treated with respect. I mean, you always have an outlier, but I know in my 10 years as a principal, I suspended 1 student, 1. So what are the preventive things that you put in place? So I think, schools of education can do a better job preparing teachers. I think also making sure, and this was something I did as deputy chancellor that got a lot of people upset with me, but I worked with, I thought was a phenomenal dean of education at NYU, Mary Brabeck, and that professors of universities should actually be in classrooms. They should go into the classrooms, and I'm talking about the elementary, middle, whatever you're preparing your kids for, being in those classrooms to see what's happening and demonstrating, again, your credibility that you could do the job as well. So I think we do a lot of things with universities. We're also looking at universities to help partner us for CTE, Career and Technology and Engineering programs. And this year, we're particularly asking them to let us use their campuses for summer work around STEM and other programs. So we're constantly talking to the universities. Also, universities in terms of partnerships, we have Queens College that now has decided to work with us. We asked them to pick 1 area of interest for them, and it's going to be English language learners, same with St. John. So don't try to be everything to everyone. figure out what you're really, really good at, and then how to saturate the market with that particular area of expertise.
Thank you. For many of us, when we come to Harvard, and I came here in '91 as a doctoral student, we're knowledgeable about teaching and learning. We have we've demonstrated leadership. The political frame is one for many of us that we learn and we talk about a great deal here. Can you speak to your relationship with Mayor de Blasio? You pointed, you've shared with us that it's of, some length. How closely do you work to enact change in the schools with the mayor, and how much do you rely on City Hall, and how do you exercise independence in your role?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to work with elected officials of all kinds. And I think the reason for that is that when parents are mad at you, and they will be, the first person they go to is to elected officials. Now, may not like their elected officials, but when they don't like you more, that's the first person they're going to go to. So I think from the very beginning, I saw part of my job in working with the mayor is to make sure that the elected officials in New York felt that they had an opportunity to speak to me. So, for example, I meet with the borough presidents, all 5 of them, like every other month. Listen to their concerns. If they have specific schools they want me to look into or do things with, I do that. When I first got on the job, within like 3 weeks, I was getting all this noise about Common Core because everybody felt that was a good thing. They didn't know why they were arguing against it, but it was a good thing, safe thing to do. So I had a workshop, literally taught a lesson, what it is and it isn't, to all the elected officials, both in New York City and the ones that represent us at the state level. So they could no longer say I'm against it, because I said, well, tell me exactly what you know, which was very little. I said, and this is what it is, and this is what it isn't. So I think working with elected officials is important. I think in terms of having mayoral control, what I like is that we have more stability. I mean, he has my back, I have his back, and I meet with him once a week. Okay. And part of what we do is that once a week, he has his agenda, I have mine. Hopefully they may not always agree, but I think that's good. I think healthy dialogue around issues. He has to govern his city. I have to make sure the schools do him credit. And I think having that healthy balance really works for both of us. Again, because I've known him over time, I would never, ever, some people ask me, would you have taken this job for anyone else? I said, no. I mean, the learning curve would have been too large. I mean, this is someone I trust, I believe in, we have the same agenda. I won't say it's easy, but it makes sense. But I think my job is also to make sure that I meet with the Education Committee of the City Council on a regular basis. When I go out to town hall meetings, I invite the elected officials, so they're part of the discourse. So we actually have a very nice relationship, I think. I meet with the speaker on a regular basis also. So I'm trying to do this is definitely a political job, but you don't come to it to appease the politicians. As an educator, you come to the politicians to educate them.
So I'm so glad that you talked about the fact that this is a political position. For some of us, we almost in a lofty way say we want to stay true to our mission. We are teachers, we are educational leaders, we're not politicians. We eschew politics. Suicide. Can you help us understand why it's so important to develop the political acumen, and how can we reconcile the difference between big P politics, like getting out there and getting votes, and small P politics, which is more about negotiating and getting things done?
First of all, I do see it as a partnership, and I really should go back and say that in all the jobs I've ever had, I was always involved in community politics with a small p. If there was something to fight for in my own specific community, I would do it. I believe that's part of being an educator. If there are things that you think are wrong that could be made right, that's what we have to do. And by the way, I would get my kids sometimes involved, which is why I said I wasn't surprised when I was called to the Chancellor's office, figured I had done something I shouldn't have done. But I do think putting your head in the sand and saying this is not my job isn't. You can't overtly be involved in politics, but certainly as a private citizen, you have a perfect right to attend meetings, hear what's being said, and also to give them credit. I see a lot of politicians who want to be educated. I have to tell you, I don't know whether it's because so many came in as progressives along with the mayor, but I find it very interesting to talk. They want to do good, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And I've also said to politicians, because there was a system in New York City that when you visited a school, the local elected official would meet you at the door and walk the building with you. Everyone in New York City knows that if Carmen's visiting a school, she takes no entourage. I mean, none. I don't want a politician. I don't want a superintendent. No one walks the building with me because I need a principal to talk to me honestly and candidly, what's on their mind, what's not. So politicians know they can meet with me. I just met with one recently, for example, who was very concerned about a specific school in his district. And he was very clear. He had been a teacher. He knew what he was talking about. And I said, look, I'm going to give you someone to talk to. Together, you're going to work out a plan, and then you'll come back to me. So they're not the enemy, but how you go politically, and also I think it is certainly under mayoral control, making sure that you're speaking what the mayor also believes in. But I also feel that a leader, especially in education, needs to stand up for what they believe in. Mm-hmm. So going to Albany and making a presentation, the education panel, on something that I think is not right, is my responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's not something I had to think about twice. How to word it nicely is another story. But I do think you pick your fights, you figure out what you're going to stand for, but people are watching you. And I have to tell you, in ways that you cannot even imagine. I mean, one of the things to me of this job that I don't even get is how many people want to have their pictures taken. I mean, selfies. I mean, listen, I dress up to go to the supermarket now, and I never did that before. And one of the things people say to me over and over again, we like the way you go out there. We like people, some people say blunt, some people say principled, use your own words. But we need, as educators, to stand for something. And if you stand for credibility, if you stand for equity, if you stand for all kids, you should be able to say that out loud. And you should be able to do it in a way that you're educating other people. My husband says I should stop being an educator even when I'm resting, but you can't. Those of us who've been educators for certain years, that is who we are. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. In the Women in Leadership Institute, our last presenter, Sandra Sucher, presented a case on Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is the first female African head of state. She's the president of Liberia. And there was a wonderful conversation that ensued. She was able to do something that participants called courageous, and she took risks, and she, took a moral stand. She also, and that didn't come up in the conversation, operated out of a mother, out of a mother's morality, almost, when she spoke to the young soldiers. And as I listened to you, and this was not one of the questions that I had, but as I listened to you talk about educating politicians and just, you have a moral authority, it appears, that's based on so many hats that you've worn over time. Can you speak about, because you come across as everyone's teacher, your husband says, everyone's principal, but also everyone's mother, everyone's sister for us, best friend. So you have the ability to get people to listen. How do we develop that? Or how do they, because I'm on your end of the spectrum, but how do they, who have many, many, many more years in the field, develop that ability to get people to buy in using what they have at the moment?
I think, first of all, be humble. You don't know it all. None of us do. Do what you're doing now. Create networks. Create other people who can help you, both men and women. Every stage of your life, even if you don't know it, you're meeting someone who's going to help you later. The other thing is develop a personal story that resonates with other people. When I came back, actually as a deputy chancellor, I had just become a grandmother, an abuela, because my grandchildren call me abuela. And the day that Charlie was born, I actually left work, and everybody was really shocked that I was really running to the hospital because women didn't do that. And that you stayed at the work. No. I'm having my first grandchild. I'm staying at work. No, I don't think so. But everybody knew Charlie was born. I sent out a blast throughout the city of New York, and every time I went to any meeting, I talked as an abuela. Abuela to my teachers is if they wanted to give me a suggestion about something, they should always put it in writing first, because I needed to digest it, because chances are they're going to come to me that, if I was not in a good mood or whatever, the answer might not. So I said, put it in writing, give me 2 days, I'll get back to you. And always, and I say this to parents citywide, if you're going to give me a problem, give me at least 2 solutions that you think of. Because if you can't think of that solution, then how do you expect me to do it? The other thing I've learned, that one of the good things is to say, when someone asks you something, I'll get back to you. I was telling Ursulina, one of my favorite principals said to me, Carmen, never say no or yes to anyone who's asking you advice. Say, I'll get back to you, because it keeps you from having to make an immediate decision. But I think it's always good, and also, and not doing it in a flowery way, but complimenting the person that you're working for in a way that's sincere and positive. You know, working with so-and-so, and I'm thinking back certainly to my days as a principal, I worked under a phenomenal superintendent. So when I went out, it was not about what I did as a principal, but you know, the ability to work under Tony Alvarado and be able to be an innovative principal, it makes both of you look good, and why not? So how you work with someone and make that other person look good too is important. And also, and I guess this is the hardest advice I can give you, never work for someone you don't respect. So that if what you're fighting is not lethargy or apathy, it's not having respect, then that's not the job for you. Because the reality is that you lose your own self-respect, but you'll never get anywhere.
So you're a hard act to follow, as everyone is sitting in the room thinking X number of years from now I'm going to be Carmen Fariña.
Oh, hopefully not. They should be themselves.
Well, I think they will be. But if we only talk about everything that you did right, then that makes you almost untouchable. I know that some of my most important lessons I learned because I either fell on my face or I made a mistake. Would you be willing to share a time when you weren't so successful and what you learned from it, and how we ought to take a learning stance when things don't work out as we hoped they would?
Well, you know, I've said this before, and it seems very silly, but, you know, I was very happy to think I was going to change the world as chancellor. And then my, fourth day on the job, we had a snowstorm. Now, the first snowstorm, I closed schools, people loved me. Second time, the snowstorm, I closed schools, they hated me. I mean, they opened schools, they hated me. And what I learned is that less is more. I now have, and also, when you make a mistake, and I still don't think I made a mistake, but I should not have said it's a beautiful day. But having said that, I own it. And when you make a mistake or something that's that because the press is, own it. So now I have it over my desk. It's a beautiful day. It is a saying. And what I also learned is that the press is going to look for things to say about you no matter what. And when I make a joke of it, which I've done over and over again, it lessens the criticism. That isn't to say I have more, but that one, honestly, took me back a month in terms of my own energy and my own self-confidence. Because after taking such a beating, I had press who literally waited in the lobby of my apartment to take my picture on a Sunday because they wanted me to look like whatever. And I think one of the things when you take these positions, almost becoming immune to what other people think of you. You have to kind of build a relationship with people you respect so that what they think of you is important. But I think my lesson learned there was when you don't have to say something to the press, don't.
One last question, and then it's open to all of you. If you had to give us one piece of advice to aspiring teachers and administrators, whether it's in PK-12 or in higher ed, what would it be?
I would say to see every student in your class as if they were your own child, and that includes in higher ed. I just read a wonderful article about all education is relationships. And students don't learn in classes, and I don't care how old you are, including my age, where they don't feel respected by the teacher or recognized. One of the lessons I learned as a staff developer, and I did mostly middle schools, is that any time I did a demo lesson, I did a lot of them every week, that every child in that class would speak while I was in the classroom. And by speak, I mean turn and talk to 3 people, say your name out loud. A child's voice has to be heard, as does an adult. All of us in college have been in classes where we know that if we were to say hello to the professor when we walked out, they wouldn't have the biggest idea who we were. So how do we, in education, the truest thing about education is you want to make people real people. And you can't do that if you as an educator yourself are not recognizing them in your own classroom. So I would say the reason I love the work I do, and I've always loved the work, is I think I've been very good at developing relationships, networks, and people, to be honest, who will say to me, Carmen, I'll work, but I'll only work for you. And that's always not a good thing, but it shows that they want to work for the kind of person you are, not necessarily for what you know. And I think all of us who want to be in education should be able to do that.
So we have some people here who would love to work for you. What comes with working for Carmen Fariña?
You have to ask her, Selena, that. You get a lot of free advice.
About everything?
Yes, personal life included, right? She has to go home for date night on Friday nights. I had a rule as a superintendent, no principal was allowed to work after 4 o'clock on Fridays. And I would call their schools to make sure they weren't in the building. Because if you don't have that balance, you're not good to me as a worker. So that was part of it. And she's getting better at it. I would say to work for me, you have to be willing to, obviously, to work hard, to come with your own set of principles, but to understand that working with others is crucial. You're not a lone ranger. You're not someone who's coming to compete with others, so you're the smartest person in the room. I also like people who disagree with me. I think that was a hard lesson for some people to take. Disagree politely. But say, you know, Carmen, based on I'm always looking for smart people who have a different point of view, who have done their research. I mean, we're working with your students specifically because I want them to come and say, this is a better way to do this or a different way to do this, and I want that research. But also people who really know, again, the value of relationships, who will say, you know, one of the people we hired recently said to me, one of the reasons I want to work is that I've heard of so-and-so, and I really would love to learn more from them. That's the kind of person I want. I also want people who don't think the best work in education is done on a computer. They've been trying forever to get me on Twitter. They'll never see me on Twitter, ever. We get so addicted to the technology as having all the answers that we forget the answers are with people. So be willing to visit schools, be willing to visit the field, because the best research is field-based. So, and then be willing to relocate to New York City.
Okay, which is my home city, and so I have a vested interest in its success and in Carmen's success. And
thank you so much. And Deborah, we really appreciate that.
No, it was so important to Betty Rosa, a colleague of mine from the doctoral program that I went to, arranged for Carmen and I to have dinner. It's been a year now?
Maybe,
or quite a while, and we met in this wonderful restaurant in New York. Betty and I were sipping wine, and Carmen came in and said, "That's what you're drinking?" She said, "After the day I've had today, I want a drink." and she had a real drink, and then she said to me, "So, what is it that you want?" And I said, "I don't want anything. I have watched you, and I know what you're endeavoring to do. I have a vested interest in your success." And can the students who are working on the research for Chancellor Fariña just raise your hand so that we can acknowledge that they're we do real work here. And they're saying, "Do we ever?" So just join me in thanking the Chancellor for this part. Every answer was real, and now please come on up to the mics. There's a mic there, and there's a mic over here, and she's welcoming your questions. Fabulous. Turn mine off. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Please tell us who you are and what you're doing, and then ask your question as succinctly as you can.
Hi, Chancellor Fariña. My name is Max. I'm a sophomore at the college. I graduated from Stuyvesant 2 years ago and was in the New York City public school system for all 13 years from K to 12, so I'm super excited that you're here. I'm also probably one of a very, very small number of specialized high school graduates who recognizes that you might want to consider removing the SHSAT. I'm not decided on it, but I'm not belligerently angry about it.
There's always a compromise.
And I've probably only spoken to one other person who holds that opinion. But I do want to challenge you on that, because it's a really important issue, and I think it's obviously an incredibly valid goal that you want to increase the number of blacks and Latinos primarily in Stuyvesant and Bronx Science and so on. But whether you acknowledge it or not, it's absolutely clear that if you were to eliminate the test as the sole determinant, you would also reduce the number of poor Asian Americans who are currently in the schools. Stuyvesant is 72% Asian American. 35 to 40% of us were on free lunch. These aren't kids who are, coming from wealth. It's really quite an impressive story. And by eliminating the test, you're at least implying that their way of getting in isn't as valid. And whether you acknowledge it or not, there is a trade-off. And I'm wondering, why do you think that trade-off is valid and how do you respond to Asian American communities who, quite understandably, oppose this policy change?
This is where my teacher voice comes in. First of all, I do not believe in eliminating the test at all. I believe in assessments, and I believe the specialized high schools have a place to play in the city. I believe the percentage may not be 100%, and that's something the mayor and I have discussed. So what percentage is that? I certainly think between 60 and 70% for the test makes sense to keep the test. But I think where we also have, because the other thing is I don't want students moving into those schools who will not succeed, because then the converse message that we're giving, minority kids can move there, but then they're all failing because they didn't do well. So our emphasis right now is on something called DREAM and another program that we have, where we're increasing the preparation programs, Discover, for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in programs to prepare them to take the tests, and those programs are being taught by teachers from the specialized high schools. So we're doing that as an experiment. We've been working with Brooklyn Tech in particular. Stuyvesant has a relatively new principal who also wants to be invested. So I believe in testing. It's the percentage of tests, like I believe in the Common Core test. I just don't think 50% of the test should be based for teachers' evaluation. I think 30 is more than enough. So those are the kinds of decisions you make. It's not all or nothing at all. It's somewhere in the middle. But I do want to keep those. And you never heard me say anywhere in any publication, get rid of the test.
Okay, thank you. On this side?
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm a student over at the Kennedy School. I was also a teacher in Chicago for 5 years, and that actually leads to my question. One of the messages that really resonated with me from your talk tonight was how to keep sort of young teachers in the classroom and enjoy that experience. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you can retain those young quality teachers through different perspectives, as a colleague to them, as a principal of the school, and then also how the district can foster teacher retainment.
Well, I think there are lots of things. I think our increased professional development, I think we're going to see much more retention now. The other thing, we started something in New York City under the last UFT contract called PROS. And PROS is an application process where teachers, 65% of teachers in a given building with the principal, has to come up with a plan of how they would do things differently in their building if they didn't have to follow any contract rules. And I just went to visit one of the PROS schools in a very needy neighborhood with very needy kids. And the teachers have been there for at least 5 years. Not one of those teachers is looking to leave anywhere. And why is it? Because they put together a proposal. They want to teach 40 kids in a class, 2 teachers, and at any given time, one of the teachers takes a smaller group out, like of 8 kids, and they have developed this unbelievable school, middle school, where every teacher is doing something different, but it's something they plan to do for themselves. These teachers come in early, stay late. They're a family. So how do we develop schools where teachers collaborate, work together? We also have something in New York City now called Learning Partners. Learning Partners was something that I had done as a superintendent that we now raised to a higher level. If there's a school that's doing something particularly well in a particular area, special needs, ELS, arts, you name it, technology, and the teachers and the principal are willing to be models, we now have given the leading learning partner. We have so many things, I'm trying to remember which ones. And the 2 other schools work with them. The deal is those 3 schools work as partners. They visit each other, but the lead learning partner, the principal, assistant principal, and at least 2 to 3 teachers make extra money, but they're getting rewarded for sharing their best practices. We were too long in New York City competitive, which is the best school, the best scores. We're now saying the only people who make more money are the people who are sharing their ideas. And in those schools, learning partner schools, we expect to have about 125 of them in September. We're going to see our retention rate grow up. And by the way, we have offers teachers in those buildings, APs and APs principal, and they want to stay in the jobs they're doing now. So it's about how do you make the job joyful, but also not keep sticking people on, your scores aren't high enough, or this isn't high enough.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Skolnick. I'm in the 2nd year of the Doctorate in Education Leadership program. I studied with the great Dr. Deborah Jewell-Sherman. My question is really about sort of top-down versus bottom-up change. And so it seemed like the last administration was focused on empowering principals and saying they could make decisions because they were closest to students to some extent. And maybe that went too far. So certain things like saying, you need to be a teacher for 7 years before you can become a principal.
Oh,
Or
you read all my regulations.
Or
Good.
saying well, that was one of the first ones. And or saying, it's going to be, we're focusing on 2nd grade, 7th grade, and 10th grade. You could imagine that there are schools that say, well, we know our first graders, and our first graders are the ones where we really need to put our best teachers. So how do you make those decisions about sort of what's going to be uniform across the entire district and where you're going to allow the local context to make the decision about what's right for those students?
I think, first of all, I'm going to say that autonomy is a word, and we can all interpret it differently. And when principals were given autonomy without support, it's useless. Because if your autonomy is to do whatever you want, but when you run into trouble, you have no one to ask for help, that's a real issue. So as a principal, I thought I was very, very autonomous. But I also knew I was being supervised, and I do believe in supervision. So I think with the new superintendents that we have in place, we replaced 50% of our superintendents. But every superintendent was chosen because they were a good instructional person. They had to be a good instructor. They had to have been a principal, and they need to come to the job with the ability to support the people that they're going to be working with. They also had to make a promise to me that if there was any principal that wasn't doing what's best for kids, that they would be willing to get the hard job, get it done, and get them out. So I am certainly, when I say 2nd grade, 7th grade, I am not micromanaging the schools, nor am I asking the superintendents to do that. I'm saying as a point of focus citywide, we don't have money for everything. So when I have to decide where am I focusing money, 2nd grade summer school is where I'm focusing money. 7th grade. You have your own money, you want to spend it differently, be my guest. But in terms of making a citywide, the reason I changed my first regulation was exactly what you said. You have to have been 7 years a pedagogue to become a principal, is that we looked at the statistics of who were the people leaving the system at a higher rate, and there were people who became principals too soon. And being a principal is not just about academics, it's about, going back, being a human being. I had teachers in my office crying because their boyfriend left them. I had parents crying because they were deathly ill. You need to have the wisdom that you only get over time. So to me, it was also about how do we say after 7 years as a pedagogue, you may have had enough experience that allows you to do the job. And I actually think we're in a much better place because of that. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Chancellor Fariña. I'm Danny Solomon. I'm a graduate of the New York City school system, Stuyvesant too, as it would happen, and very glad to see you here and not Joel Klein. In any case, I wanted to ask you. You sort of alluded to earlier the fact that you have a sort of different educational vision than Governor Cuomo, and I think it's fair to say Mayor de Blasio also does. How has the process of negotiating those differences been, considering so many of the priorities that you and de Blasio have adopted in office seem to depend on actions from the state legislature? As an addendum, I'll add that I'm glad that the state legislature is not friendly to your proposal to remake admissions at the specialized high schools. Thank you.
okay, that may or may not be true, but having said everything else, I think it's important to lay out a really cogent argument for what you believe in. And then you have to go out and sell it to the public. I mean, I met with editorial boards in the last 2 weeks. It's amazing when I say to an editorial board, what CEO, including the publisher of a newspaper, would allow an outside company to come in and tell them who to hire and who to fire? And all of a sudden, eyebrows go up. So how do you do the analogies to things in other people's world? I think it's always hard when you have a political agenda. My belief is that New York City, we've been doing a lot of educating of parents that work. The people who are going to make the difference are the voters. So how do you get the message out to parents and other organizations? We have changed from the past in the thing that we're working collaboratively, not always in total agreement, with the unions. We got a lot more out of our last 2 union negotiations because we sat and we talked to each other like human beings. They're not the enemy. They're not always in agreement with us, but we got unbelievable things happen. We now have schools, 2 schools, which were the out-of-time schools, where we're going to be able to replace any teacher in that building that the principal feels needs to be replaced. We would not have gotten that if we were constantly adversarial. So I think, again, listening and talking. I have coffee once a month with Michael Mulgrew and Ernie Logan, and I respect them as leaders. We will not always agree, but we will not disagree publicly if we can come to some settlement behind the scenes. And that to me goes back to respect and building relationships.
And small p politics, yes.
It's politics too, yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming today. My name is Sarah Robb. I was a master's student here last year and now work in New York City on the teacher evaluation. And so you were recently in the press speaking out against Cuomo's proposed legislation changes. And so I'm interested in knowing what your vision is for New York City's evaluation system and what role it should play in both developing teachers but then also making human capital decisions.
Well, I think one of the things, I believe a teacher is more than just a test. A test is one day in a child's school career. I do believe in testing. I believe tests are important. I do think they give us a diagnostic tool, and I think teachers should be held accountable for some of the things that kids need to know. Having said that, we've come out with a new framework in New York City as to what everyone should be evaluated on. So I think teachers also need to be evaluated on collaborating with other teachers. When I was a principal, I had one teacher who literally locked her door, literally, and no one could go in, including me. And you know what, I didn't want to either, because every time I went in there, I was sick, so I said, okay. She lasted a year, but that was her thing. I had another teacher who came running down to my office one day, crying hysterically that something had happened. What happened? She said, oh, you won't believe this, you won't believe it. I said, what happened, Iris? She says, someone stole my bulletin board idea. And I, with a perfectly straight face, said to her, and you should be flattered, because there's not very much else they could steal in terms of your teaching. So, true story. What has helped me in life was to be very honest with I have a friend, well, actually the person who wrote the book with me, Laura Koch, she said, Carmen, no one says something with a smile on your face. Person doesn't know whether you're being serious. But I was being serious. So being collaborative, family engagement. You need to evaluate a teacher on how well they work with parents. I mean, to me, if that's not part of a teacher's job, what else is? A teacher needs to know the community. When you have teachers who say to you, not so many anymore, but at one time, I had teachers who would say to me as a superintendent, oh, give me a job, but I can't go work with those kids. Who are those kids? Those kids are our kids. That neighborhood. So I do think a teacher is a sum of many, many things, and on our framework that we've developed based on the University of Chicago, that's how I want to evaluate teachers. I also feel that if we're talking about principal autonomy, how can you say on one hand give principals autonomy and say you have no role in evaluating your teachers? As a principal, I visited every classroom in my school at least twice a week, sometimes more, depending on what I was looking for. But all the time walking in classrooms as a superintendent, and even now, I was in a school recently, and I know that principal hadn't visited her school classrooms at all. So I gave her a little quiz at the end. That's that voice that you see in me, right? Okay. If you had to pick one of the classrooms on the third floor, because I already knew which one I was hoping she'd say, that you would rather nobody visit, which one would you be? And she couldn't think of it. And that told me she wasn't. So if you're saying evaluating teachers also has to be, does the principal know what's happening? And you can't have principal autonomy and then 50% of teacher evaluation on tests. They don't gel. So to me, it's common sense. One of the things I've been trying to do as chancellor, I said, if it's not common sense, why are we doing it? Why don't we just go back to what's common sense? So that's my answer.
Great. Over here.
Hi, I'm Olivia, and I'm a freshman at the college. I care very deeply about sort of where child development and mental health intersect with education, and I think frequently in schools, teachers or counselors identify children who might need extra support based on sort of disciplinary infractions, but I'm wondering if there are other ways that you use to identify kids who still are struggling with things but maybe quieter about it. And also, you spoke about social emotional learning in 7th grade, and I was sort of wondering what that kind of integration with academics looks like.
I am extremely concerned about social emotional support, to the point that we hired an additional 200 guidance counselors this year. We're looking to do more. I want to get more social workers because they can make home visits versus guidance counselors who may or may not. I get emails all the time, and the ones that really upset me the most, and with bar none, are when I get one that a child has committed suicide or something has happened. And that has become one of the reasons why I've been so committed to this. We now are starting in New York City 100 community schools. The community schools are extended day schools, all of which will have social, and because of the First Lady of New York City, a lot of emphasis being placed on mental health. And we need to do more. We need to also teach teachers how to get signs of this, but also get kids to be able to talk in small groups more about some of their issues. It's not going to be easy. 1.1 million children, every time I hear that, I say, oh my God. But we really need to also work more closely with our hospitals, which is what we're doing. The one thing about a school, it's not an isolated entity. It's all how you get everybody working together. Not going to be solved tomorrow. We have changed our discipline code about a week and a half ago. We're moving towards a more restorative justice model. Every superintendent has to keep track of suspensions, principal suspensions in particular, and I want to see those go down because I do feel that if we have better dialoguing in our own schools, that should change. We're retraining our school safety officers so they become less punitive and more collaborative to the degree that they can. So it's definitely one of the things that we're concerned about, but it's not going to be an easy solution.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Asma Akritz, and I'm part of the Women in Leadership Seminar this weekend that has been wonderful, and thank you for coming out and speaking with us. I'm actually from Chicago, and first of all, I wanted to applaud you as an American Muslim woman. We just heard that you and the Mayor of New York City have made the 2 Muslim holidays part of the calendar for American Muslim children in New York City. So thank you, that's great. And I'm hoping Mayor Emanuel and CEO Barbara Bennett will follow suit for CPS students because I know we have a huge population. So thank you for your leadership on that. My question to you is, in continuing with Common Core transitions, are you concerned that the achievement gap is going to increase for ELL students or minority students or students with special needs, implementing with the new standards?
I think we have to do better of getting materials that are adapted for these audiences. One of the things, for example, when you have Common Core for English language learners and you have no materials written in Spanish primarily, but certainly other languages to do the Common Core, and we're already in conversations with publishers to get more materials that meet the Common Core in other languages. So we're doing that. I always worry when it says about if we raise the standards, we're raising, increasing the gap, because I think the problem has been that we've never raised the bar high enough for the kids who might not meet it. And as a result, we've accepted a lot less than they're capable of than what they could be. So I think when we say that all special needs students, this is their entry point, but they need to go up, whatever that entry point is, we need to do that. Because I think for too long, remember, I've been in education long enough when special needs was a place where you warehouse kids. That's got to stop. All our kids need to be educated. The same thing with Ls. We have Ls who come into this country in upper grades who are perfectly literate in their own language, who are very knowledgeable, particularly in science. I find that many else, depending on the countries they come from, have more science. So why not their entry level be bilingual so they can read the contents in their languages? So I'm never worried that we're raising the bar too high. I'm worried that we're not getting all the kids who need to meet that bar ready to do it.
No, they were here. Go ahead. And you'll be last.
My name is Rochelle Robinson Dukes. I'm a higher education educator from Chicago. My question is a soft question. We know that mentoring is really key for women in education. And I was just wondering, who are your mentors and who are you currently mentoring? Because that is really a factor to navigate through the politics of education.
I think probably most of my mentors were men to some degree, because at the time I started, there were very few women in leadership. My biggest mentor, and it's going to sound corny, but was really my dad. At a very young age, I think women who have men early on in their lives, my father taught me, stand up for your belief system. Remember, my belief system was not the typical of the age. In my culture, women did not go to college. I was the first one in my family to go to college. My mother-in-law didn't talk to me for whatever, because her son, her only child, was marrying someone who was going for her master's at one point, which he thought I was out. So I think my dad, who basically said to me, you can be anything you want to be, and I'll be there supporting you, I think was that. I think in terms of being a mentor, I have mentored a tremendous amount of women. I was a mentor certainly in my consulting time, and people constantly say to me, you're my mentor, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. The reason I was so happy today when someone mentioned they had read my book is that when I go to schools in New York City, the first thing principals put, look, Carmen, I read the book, and this is what you did, and you did it. I said, don't do it the way I did it. This is just an idea of how you might adapt it. So I think you mentor also by the way you model your life. It's not always consciously going out and having coffee and saying, do this, this, and this, but just, leading a path and saying, this is how I live my life. And if I made an influence on anyone, I hope it'll be my own 2 daughters, because, we can mentor every stranger in the world, but if we don't start within our own homes, we've kind of lost the battle.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Radhika Arvamudan, and I'm a part of the Women in Leadership Institute. I come from Salus University outside of Philadelphia, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. My question is regarding programs or initiatives that you may have in place to prepare students or even encourage them to go into college education. I'm more concerned about the declining rate of people going into college. So what are some initiatives that you have put in place or that you've developed after you've taken this position?
Well, certainly we want to see our college, we don't really want to see kids get into college, we want them to stay there, because our original research showed that a lot of them were getting there, but not staying. So I would say the biggest initiative this year is I've become a fanatic on improving writing in the high schools. Well, let me put it this way, in just getting it into the high schools. I go to high schools and I see no writing. It drives me crazy. So in the last month and a half, I have actually been going and asking principals to invite me to their schools if they have good writing programs, and they have to be very specific. And I went to one particular high school in Jamaica, and the principal has a particular program, and I saw it in 3 different classrooms. Brand new teacher, 4 or 5 year teacher, and a very senior teacher. All of them were using the program, and all of them were doing it differently. One was doing a Socratic seminar, another one was doing turn and talk, another was doing more of a teacher-directed lesson. But in every single classroom, the kids were actively engaged, and the writing around the classrooms was very clear, vivid, content areas, as well as an ELA. Then I go to the principal's office, and she has this whiteboard with the name of every child who didn't meet their regents, and every child who had coursework to complete. And she had an eraser, and she said, I want to see this eraser buried in June. And I keep using her as an example. She just came to the principal's conference. I gave her a shout out from the audience. We need to have high school principals who know the bottom quartile kids in their school by name, on a board, and hold themselves accountable. But also, we need to have writing in every single content area. Because the kids get to college and they can't write, what's the point? So now we're actually going to be starting a choice. Again, he's going to get up again and say principal autonomy. Principals can make a choice, but they have to make a choice for some form of writing program in all content areas.
Thank you.
And then you'll have the last word.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. It's great to hear your story. My name is Michelle. I work at a nonprofit focusing on school turnaround here in Boston, and previously I worked at one of the top charter schools in New York City, which was in Brownsville, Brooklyn.
Oh, which one?
Uncommon, Brownsville.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So having worked with both really successful charter schools and also traditional district schools, working really hard on turnaround efforts, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on, if you had your way, what would high-performing charter schools in New York City be doing more of or doing differently to help make sure the advantages students at those schools have enjoyed can be replicated for more students in the city?
Well, first of all, I know Uncommon very well. I know Brett, and I just visited one of the Uncommon schools. I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I think we need to be more collaborative. I don't think fighting is worth our energy. Uncommon just got a dissemination grant and is working with a lot of the schools in Brownsville, actually. They're working with one of the districts, District 23. I went to one of their Saturday programs where they're working on more writing skills, because that's one of the things we say we need more help with. I think the other end, and I'm not telling stories out of school because Brett has heard me, I think a lot less regimentation in the charter schools. I'd like to see the kids thinking more on their own. I get crazy when everything is taught to the minute, 22 minutes of this and 30 minutes of that. So where, after you get the basic skills, are kids allowed to think a little bit more freely? So we have a lot to learn from each other. One of the things that now with co-located space, which is a big issue in New York City, is I try to bring everybody to the table and see what they can all put at the table that they can share together. What are the resources? We just did one with Achievement First, where 3 schools are going to share a building. Each of them has something unique about it, so why can't they all share that one unique fact with each other? So we're trying to change the conversation, because I'd rather spend my energy on collaborating than beating each other up. So that's.
Thank you. And you will have the last question.
Thank you.
Wow, you timed this perfectly.
Thank you for coming today and also for sharing your thoughts about charter schools. I actually used to work at Achievement First, and I think I might have worked at the school you're referring to. But my question is actually
Tell us
about...
your name. Your name.
Oh, my name's Ben. I graduated from HGSE last year, and I currently work in education research. And I'm actually part of a team that's like looking into your universal pre-K program. And I was really interested in learning about, from your perspective, what are the strengths of the program that you see emerging so far, and what are some of the challenges you foresee in the future?
Well, I think the challenge certainly is the scope of the size of doing it all at once, and I think what I see happening and what I really want to focus on is high-quality teachers no matter where the kids are, because I think we now own all of it, and I think that's really good. And I really want to see what I'm hoping will come out of it, even with this 1 year, parent involvement starting early and in a positive way. In pre-K, it's very easy to get parents to school because it's fun and games, but if they get into the habit of coming, maybe they'll keep coming the rest, because parent engagement is crucial. Mm-hmm. And also what we're assisting in the UPK is that many more parents also get involved in workshops and how to help their child at home. The other thing I've been pushing is an increased emphasis on vocabulary development, because what we seem to see missing across the board, and that goes through all socioeconomic levels, less high-level vocabulary words in kids when they talk to each other. Because it's, put your coat on, eat your food, do this. It's not a conversational kind of language. So one of the things I've been pushing is how often do kids talk to each other, which is why play is important. If you're in the block corner, you should be talking about what you're doing in the block corner. And the word is out now. If Carmen is coming, it's always out there. The one thing you better make sure the kids are doing is writing their name or learning their letters. It's joy, but at that age, you can also be learning. So how are you exposing the kids to literacy? How are you reading books? Are you doing it right? I was in a wonderful pre-K class where the teacher just paused and waited for the children to finish their answers. And I said, and the people who were with me, here I'm talking about I take visitors with me sometimes so they see what I see. They couldn't understand why I spent so much time in that classroom. And I finally said, what did you see special? And one of the persons that I took with me said, oh, she was right on the money, she asked the right questions, whatever, and the other one said something else. I said, no, she paused. She did not give the kids the answers. She waited until the kids came up with their own answers. And to me, we need to do more training of early childhood teachers to do the pausing and let the kids talk and let the kids. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from UPK, but on my, people think we're going to create a miracle in 1 year. It's going to take us 2. That's a great way to end.
Great.
Okay.
So, colleagues, we have been privileged to spend an hour and a half with a woman leader who came out of retirement to take on this responsibility. I admire that. I truly was just, I thought, if she's willing to do this at sacrifice, then every able-bodied person who can lend a hand needs to be part of this fight. She has 1.1 million children and 1,800 schools, and yet she has come from New York, probably in snow, to be with us here at HGSE to talk to us. And I hope that you have been as informed, as impressed, as challenged, and uplifted as have I. Please join me in a round of applause for the Chancellor of the New York City Public Schools, Carmen Fariña. This is wonderful. In this kind of setting, just the word chancellor really hit me.